And welcome to this session. As you already said, my name is Daniela Renger, and I would like to tell you a little bit about my research on respect and self-respect and how this could be a framework for life improvement science. So my research is basically concerned with the question how people see themselves, how they relate to themselves, and on what dimensions they evaluate themselves. And I have been inspired by a social philosophical theory by Axel Honneth. It's called social recognition theory, and it was proposed in the mid-90s. And in this theory, Honneth suggested 3 different forms of positive self-regard, or in other terms, self-recognition. And these are very interesting for me, and I will show you why. So the first one I refer to as self-confidence. So this is the emotional part. So if a person can say, I feel emotionally safe, then this person is said to have high self-confidence. So it's about liking the self, loving the self, not hating the self. So this is well known to psychologists. The global self-esteem measures and scales include a lot of these aspects, feeling good about the self. The second form of self-recognition that is proposed in this theory is called self-competence. And this is something that can be distinguished from feeling emotionally safe. It's about seeing the self as a competent person. So this is also not news to psychologists. This is also part of the self-esteem concepts, and there have also been suggestions to distinguish these 2 aspects. For example, by Tafrodi and Swan, who proposed scales or concepts to differentiate these 2 aspects. So as I said, so far it's not new, but what is new to psychology is the third one. This is referred to as self-respect, and this is something that Honneth argues is another form, another dimension that individuals can relate to themselves. It's about the belief of possessing equal rights. So, and this is supposed to be different from feeling emotionally safe and from seeing the self as a competent person. And I have tried to also empirically show that, and I developed scales to measure these 3 forms, and I was able to really show that they can be distinguished. Why self-respect is important, I will show you in a few minutes. But first of all, I would also focus on another important aspect of this theory, and it's the thoughts that Honneth proposes about the input side. So how do people arrive at a self-understanding of being of high self-confidence, self-competence, or self-respect? And he says that all are socially shaped. So in order to arrive at high self-confidence, people need need-based care by others. This is something we also know from, for example, from attachment theory. So especially children in the first years of life, they need others to take care of them, to satisfy their emotional and also physiological needs. So this is an interaction that's really important for people to arrive at this self-understanding. Also for the second one, he says that we are not born with high or low self-competence feelings. This is also something that needs to be communicated by other people to us. So other people need to tell us that something was good that we did, or that it was a valuable contribution to society or to the family or to whatever. And last but not least, also for self-respect, also this idea of possessing equal rights needs to be communicated to people. So we need experiences of equality-based respect. So we need to be taken seriously by other people. We need others to treat us as equals. And this is something where we also suggested scales to measure those social recognition experiences. And in my talk, I want to focus on respect and self-respect because they have been largely neglected in psychology so far. So we all know that on a theoretical level, basic human rights, freedom, and equality are codified by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also, of course, by the constitutions of most countries. But Major already found in the mid-90s that not all people have internalized these equal rights and the associated entitlements. And this is what I also find on this self-respect measure. So if I ask people whether they really feel like equals in everyday life, if they have the feeling that they possess the same dignity as others, there's a great variance on this scale. So even in Germany, where all people are entitled to equal rights before the law, I can find these differences. So it's obviously the subjective perception of own rights that matters, not the actual rights that I have in a country, but the subjective perception of own rights. And the idea is that this is because the respect experiences that people make vary. And so we arrive at these differences in self-respect. Okay, so this is the basic definition of how I understand self-respect. And now I would like to show you a little bit about my research, my empirical research on the consequences of high or low respect and self-respect. So first of all, respect experiences are really important and predict social identity and cooperation. So I was able to show this in small groups, in work groups, for example, also experimentally and comparing high versus low respect. And we find that it has an effect on the identification with the group and also the willingness to work on behalf of the group and to cooperate. We also found this for global identity, which then further predicts pro-environmental behaviors, for example. We were also able to show that respect is important for autonomy in terms of self-determination. And it's linked to life satisfaction. So the more respect experiences people make, the more they feel treated as persons of equal rights, the more satisfied they are with their life. So my latest projects are on health outcomes, which is also really interesting. So one paper that's already published looked at how respect experiences are linked to burnout in employees. And we were able to show that indeed, the more respect experiences people make at their workplace, the less burnout symptoms they report. And just now I collect data on the relationship between self-respect and depressiveness. And it's also a quite high correlation, negative correlation that I find between self-respect and depressive symptoms. So again, the more people are convinced of possessing equal rights, that they own an equal space in life, the less they report depressive symptoms. It's also linked to participation. This is something that I did together with a colleague from Chile, and we looked at school participation of migrant students at school. And here again, we were able to show that respect experiences that these students made predicted their participation at school, so in decision making or also in extra school activities. And this is my major research focus. how self-respect is linked to assertiveness and protest. And this is really interesting because when I started with this research, I was, of course, looking into the literature to find out what other self-concepts that have been suggested in the past, whether they are linked to assertiveness or protest behavior. And it's really interesting because this global self-esteem measure by Rosenberg, for example, that has been used thousands and thousands of times and has been linked to almost anything, on almost any behavior, has not really been linked to assertive behavior in the past. So this was where I started to think why self-respect might play a special role here. And if you look at the self-esteem, the Rosenberg scale, you see that it contains aspects of the other two dimensions, so the self-competence and self-liking, but not so much of this idea of having equal rights and being equal to others. And so this might be the explanation of why I find these effects for self-respect, but they were not found for self-esteem in the past. So what I was able to show is that self-respect predicts assertiveness and also normative protest. So I also looked at it at a collective level, asking, this was a women's sample, for example, and it was about fighting for gender equality. And the higher the self-respect, the more the normative protest intentions. So my conclusion is that self-respect is related or predicts the entitlement of the individual. So I'm aware of my own rights. So I protest if others are kind of hurting those rights. But then I found out, and this is really interesting, that because self-respect is this idea of having equal rights, and equal rights always means I have equal rights, but also others, it always includes also the entitlement of other people. And I guess this is why I do not find any links between self-respect and aggressive forms of assertiveness, or with non-normative protest, because self-respect enables people to fight for their rights, but only until the point where others' rights would be heard. So here's some data on that. It's from a study that was published in the European Journal of Social Psychology last year. And here you can exactly see that self-respect is linked to normative collective action, but there's no link with the non-normative collective action. And this was a women's sample, and the frame was, or the context was fighting for gender equality. Okay, so to summarize, respect and self-respect have important consequences, for example, with regard to life satisfaction, but also with regard to health and to assertiveness, as I just showed you. So there is kind of a dual role of self-respect. So the internalized equality leads to the recognition of own and others' rights. So self-improvement is possible without social damage. And I think this is very, very interesting. And this is why I suggest that the tripartition of three forms of social recognition and the three corresponding forms of self-recognition might be a valuable framework for life improvement science. And it kind of reminded me of the talk of Ken Sheldon yesterday, who is talking about mitigating the risk of prioritizing collective over individual well-being. And I thought it's really interesting because I think self-respect would kind of predict the balance between collective and individual goals and also well-being, probably, because it leads people to think about themselves, not neglecting themselves, but also not to put too much emphasis on others, so to get a nice balance. Okay, so these are my references. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you're interested, feel free to contact me. Here's my email address, and I also have a homepage. And I started being active on Twitter as well. Yeah, so thank you.